Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the show. For those of you watching 2 minutes into the future, trust us, it's not us, it's Twitch. We shagged. Sorry.
Sorry, we seem to be getting some buffering issues tonight.
Anyway, welcome to the show. I'm Alistair. 8 feet to my left is the luminous Marguerite.
Luminous? That's a new one.
And still accurate, too.
Oh, I love you.
I love you, too. And we have the usual parade of joy for you tonight. Starting as ever with an opening monologue. Those of you who are new, I'll walk you real quick through what it is that we do. You have an opening monologue, which is a chance for you to get situated, get your meds if you need them, get some water, get a snack, make sure your pets and or dependents are put away or given something shiny to play with, whichever works best. And then,
we don't judge.
We don't judge. This is a no judgment zone.
The cat boy's been put away for the night. He's in the bedroom. Doors
judgment
closed.
does not exist in this dojo.
Airport mode is on. It's all good.
Then we'll talk briefly about what's happened to us this week. We'll also show off the Mighty Boy Chungas and this week's costume. And then we will dive in to the latest installment of 9 Goblins by T. Kingfisher, which is the lowest possible fantasy you can imagine and is quite glorious.
But we'll also have some content warnings, which we will make available for you in advance.
And don't worry, we call them headline content warnings. We will headline them up. And then we will take a break, and we'll come back and do some shenanigans, and I will take a drink of water.
Oh, dear.
It's going well.
Wow.
Actually, is going well. It's going better than last week.
Apologies, everybody. As you know, Alistair is still recovering from a bit of a cough. He's doing a heck of a lot better, but there may be kind of spontaneous outbursts of coughing. We will do our best and kind of muddle through.
And we have an epic shenanigans for you this week.
Yes.
Which, again, has a couple of content warnings on it, but is, in a very real sense, the good stuff. So, without further ado, unless there are
we
things...
haven't thanked Imperio for the fan art.
Massive thanks to Imperiocism for the gorgeous fan art with BB Marto. We were saying as the countdown was coming on, I adore his serious business face. I adore how he's like, I'm read book now.
Very busy face.
Very,
and of course, it's Peter reading the book, because Peter has the best voice.
Yes, of course.
I'm not biased at all.
Of course. Winky face.
Winky face.
Opening monologue?
Opening monologue. Let's see. Let's put the content warnings for the opening monologue in the chat as well.
The content warnings for this week are auto-cannibalism, non-graphic, and references to drug use.
And probably swears. Let's be honest. It's
yes,
Nate.
that's right. Yes, that's right, folks. Nate's back! For those of you who are unfamiliar with Nate Crowley, our house band, he is a wonderfully prolific and versatile author whose work includes a travel log about a travel journalist traveling across the various genres.
Who is traveling.
Yes,
in
traveling.
case you missed that. He's traveling. In a traveling sort of way.
And criminally overlooked duology about simultaneously deep-sea life and zombie labor rights. Yes. And most recently, like I say, is the travel logbook. There's a bunch of Warhammer 40,000 stuff coming out very soon as well, which just looks like the most fun. And when he's not writing books, much like myself, he's writing nonfiction. Unlike myself, Nate's nonfiction is mostly concerned with video games. And Wendy, start the counter.
This is going to be a good one, folks.
Your mouse is trying to kill me.
As soon as Alistair stops trying to resize everything he's reading at the same time.
The track wheel is like, oh, will I move the screen or will I make it huge? Who can say?
It's a game. It's a game.
Suck. Anyway, Genesis Noir, Italo Calvino's WarioWare, which is a joke 3 people are going to get.
You've corpsed twice, and we just started. I don't think I have the corpse counter on my phone anymore. Oh no, Wendy! Wendy, I am relying on you. I'm so sorry. Everyone, please send Wendy all of your getting better good vibes. Wendy is currently feeling a bit under the weather.
Wendy, please heal.
Here and soldiering on. I'm deliberately misreading auto-cannibalism as cars eating cars. Well, oh great, Wendy's got a corpse counter for me now already. Laughs for the laugh god. I love it. Exactly. Okay, shall we start again? Shall we start again?
Anyway.
Apparently not. We better not get a cough counter. That's going to piss me off.
Genesis Noir. Italo Calvino's WarioWare. If malevolent aliens were designing a Matrix-style simulation to break my spirit, it would culminate in a house party. The party would be underwhelming at most, but then in the kitchen at 3 a.m., with only Tizer and Beefeater gin left to drink, I would be cornered by a man determined to tell me all about jazz, film noir, and the formation of the universe. At 5 a.m., he would move on to magical realism, and I would begin, stoically, to eat my own hands.
Thank you. Thank you, Eldridge.
There's nothing wrong with any of these things, of course, but they are frequently used as signifiers of being extremely clever by properly ghastly blokes. They make me wary. As such, then, when I started downloading Genesis Noir, a magical realist point-and-click adventure about jazz, film noir, and the formation of the universe, my hands started looking pretty tasty. Evidently, though, as you can tell from the fact I was able to type this post, I have not eaten my hands. Genesis Noir is not half as pretentious as it could be. Still, and I say this respectfully, I'm not sure it's quite as profound as it compels you to think that it is, either. If it was a story about a bin man entwined with a metaplot about the biomechanics of farts and suffused with raucous polka music, it would be easier just to be honest about it as a game. I'd play that. I'd play the shit out of that.
Of course you'd play the shit out of it. Weird Al would do the soundtrack for that game.
But it's not. It's a story about a film noir bloke entwined with a metaplot about the formation of the cosmos and suffused with sultry jazz. And that's basically critic-proof armor, isn't it? You look like a proper bofus if you didn't think that was mega clever. I will say this without hesitation. Genesis Noir is the most beautiful thing I've seen on a PC screen in ages. Creative lead Evan Anthony has managed a Herculean bit of art direction here, which gave me the same feeling as I got watching Into the Spider-Verse, the sudden, delightful shock of seeing something truly, visually original. This game took 6 years for Anthony and technical lead Jeremy Abel to make, with help from Mercy Lomelin, David Schmidt, and Adria Navarro, and it really shows. To absorb all that work over the course of just 4 hours makes for a right old spectacle, and while you might query my raving on the basis of the nice but quite simple screenshots you can see here, I can only implore you to see it in motion. There is a beautiful, obviously linked to this in the show notes, but there is a beautiful still from it of a gentleman playing a saxophone, and I apologize in advance to the Americans on the feed, for whom I suspect this will mean very little, because the caption is, the problem is I cannot look at this image and not hear the saxophone solo from Baker Street. And now...
Baker Street.
I am making a note to include the song Baker Street in this week's show notes, because that's my life now.
Sing a little bit of it.
You don't want me to do that.
Oh, but you're on camera.
I like you people. Culture.
Hashtag.
F yeah. That's what we're doing tonight. I hate this track wheel so much. Your track wheel hates me. It hates me.
Stop using the track wheel.
What's it there for if it's not there to be track wheeled?
Just make the words go, funny boy.
Needless to say, the music is great too. What I should do here is come up with some really poetic way to describe how saxophones and that sound before name-dropping a handful of semi-obscure jazz musicians in comparison. That would make me look well smart. I can't do that in good faith, as I wouldn't know what I was talking about, so I'll just say it sounds very pleasant and it accompanies the art perfectly. Looking back on what I've just written, you'd be forgiven for thinking I was talking about an animated film here. I'm 500 words into a review of the video game Genesis Noir, and I haven't talked about how it plays. And that's never the sign of an absolute thrill ride, is it? I know. It's absurd to apply the same criteria when assessing art and entertainment, etc., etc., but I'm going to be honest here and admit that I play games primarily for a laugh, in which context I found this one a bit hard going. Slapping the fish right on the table, there's not that much playing in this game. It is, in essence, an animated film, with bits where you borrow the main character in order to tackle strange cosmic minigames. Each of these mini-games puzzles takes a wildly different format. You might be trying to get a tree to grow by lopping off branches 1 minute and trying to perform a gravitational slingshot maneuver with a cigarette butt the next.
I'm sorry, gravitational slingshot maneuver with a cigarette butt.
Oh, you have no idea what's coming.
Brace for impact.
The lion's share of the fun here is in orienting yourself to each new challenge. There's been a lot of creativity thrown into differentiating the dozens of games within the game, and there's always a dependably enjoyable bit of brain fizz that you try to work out what the operating conditions are each time. After you've worked out what to do, the puzzle's usually pretty quick and straightforward. It's Italo Calvino's WarioWare, in short. And there's a still here of the main character with the caption, "This game was about balancing a frequency in order to get a sapling to grow and made superb use of audio cues."
I would totally play that puzzle.
Yes.
I would totally play that puzzle. My favorite puzzles in
The passenger, the witness,
The
sorry.
Witness were the audio puzzles. I love an audio puzzle.
Also, it's adorable how so many of the minigames involve the protagonist looming in the background like a curious toddler peering at a worm. For the most part, the interactive and non-interactive parts of the game flow together very elegantly, without offering you any instructions beyond the time-honoured press WASD to move at the start. Genesis Noir pretty much always makes it clear what you're meant to be doing. Still, there were some failures of intuitive design, where I was left aimlessly clicking around the screen, keen to move on. It might seem mean to nitpick this, but then, if you're aiming for the feel of a silent movie with occasional segues into player agency, you might want to bear in mind that Jimmy Cagney never paused halfway through his films to stare brutishly at a desk for 3 minutes, prodding randomly at objects with an increasing sense of frustration.
Oh, sure he did. They just cut that part because you can do that in a movie. You can't do that in a game, or at least you certainly couldn't in a live stream.
Beyond the preternaturally good animation and the saxophones, the thing holding Genesis Noir together is its story. Or rather, its stories. Ostensibly, it's about a watch-selling grifter trying to prevent the gunishment of a singer he fancies by her horrid coiffured bandmate. It's a plot that wouldn't be out of place in a Mega Drive game, if I'm being honest, but then it goes all magical realism, doesn't it? The grifter slips into a mind-bending other space via the kind of just because the magical realism is always allowed to get away with, and there he witnesses the entire history of the cosmos as portrayed by minigames. There are some mind-blowers in there, to be fair. I could say that there are some sweeping thematic connections between the two stories, too. The Genesis Noir is a self-supporting web of metaphors, positioned in graceful chiasmus across both strands of its being something double bass, something saxophones. Maybe it is all that. I don't know. I could invent all kinds of semiotic structures that were either intended or weren't, but I'd be lying if I said I was pondering them hours after finishing the game. There's also another picture here with the caption, "Me, gazing with faint aggravation at a blank piece of room as I click bomb everything in sight. Turned out there was a yellow diamond I had to click on twice. Arbitrarily." I'll finish by reiterating that this is 100% a game which you should buy. I have a strong and sincere admiration for the people who made it. At the same time, if it didn't look so good, and if its component games were even a touch less creative, I probably would have gotten bored before finishing. It has, for sure, been designed with great reverence for all its source material, but I suspect will only leave you with massive insights into the nature of the universe if you really, really want it to. And the final caption here is, "Honestly, consider this sequence in which you have to whirl your mouse around the screen to make a star rotate faster and faster, till it eventually swells and bursts into a supernova, from which a stag emerges, and tell me it wouldn't be quite a treat while mashed." Or if you're stoned, and that's neither a weak burn on the game nor a cheap drugs punchline. I'm being completely serious when I say I think Genesis Noir would be properly transcendental to play well off your tits on edibles. The constant, unexpected transitions between visual schemes, the wild leaps in subject matter, the sudden appearance of majestic stags would have all slam dunked me into the bin of my own subconscious like I'd stuck every Boards of Canada album on simultaneously. Never let it be said, I do not appreciate the highbrow.
See, now I'm really curious because the term magical realism has a very specific historical context, and it's suffering from genericide, and that people have started using it more as a marketing category than to specifically talk about the Latin American fantasy escape from colonial consequences subgenre that it was originally coined as.
If you want magical realism, you want 100 Years of Solitude by, I want to say Gabriel Garcia Marquez, but I'm not sure that's the right individual.
We'd have to look it up.
Making a note. Baker Street and 100 Years of Solitude. Wow!
That's a heck of a start to the stream now, isn't it?
This is off to a good start.
Very much off to a good start.
Anyway, hi everyone, how you been? We have had a good week.
Yeah, it has been a good
I'm going to
week.
come on camera for a minute.
Oh, okay, hold on.
Did you close that tab?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Hey, everybody.
We've had a good week.
Oof.
It's been
What
good.
am I doing here?
We're talking about the week. That's been good.
It has been good. It's been very busy.
We're hiring loads of people, and it's very intense in the short term because in order to hire loads of people to do some work that we don't want to do
It's
anymore.
not that we don't want to do anymore. It's that we're trying to do a lot, and therefore we could probably use a hand with more people.
Indeed.
And that's what we are doing. And I don't know why on earth we're dropping so many frames. It's frustrating the heckola out of me. So,
Especially when we're on green.
maybe I stared at it long enough that it's going to behave now. Wouldn't that be nice?
But that's going on. I'm still writing a book I can't tell you anything about. And other things happened. I mentioned the West Wings. My favorite West Wing episode is Celestial Navigation.
Don't let him tell that story again, folks. He's tell it every single time we let him tell it. Why don't you show them Chungus? And I can tell you about my ridiculous Chungus failure. There's the chunky boy.
Jaunty
I'm
chapeau.
gonna go push the button to talk about Chungus failure.
Because there has been a Chungus failure this week.
Yeah. So I put on a chungoid.
Thanks, Wendy.
I put on a chungoid. I put on a loaf of bread on Tuesday, and I had some meetings, and I set myself an alarm.
5 meetings.
Shush. And I set myself an alarm to take Chungus, the chungoid, out of the airing cupboard and put him into the oven. And then the alarm went off, and I was in the middle of a meeting. And then today I remembered he was there. And no, Chungus is fine. The loaf of bread I was baking from Chungus was DOA, I'm afraid.
Yes.
I even tried. I tried shaping it. I tried putting it in a bowl. I heated the oven. I preheated the pan. And then I went to flip it out to put it into the bowl.
And it just basically went,
Yeah, it was goo. It had given its ghost a year ago, a year ago in yeast years, a century ago, a lifetime ago in yeast years, and it pressed F for bread. It was not to be. So there's no fresh sourdough. Chungus is fine. He's right there. He's been fed. He's happy. He doesn't care. I mean, he's like Zeus. He has a gazillion children, and some of them make it, and some of them don't. He takes that into account. It's not personal, like Nate's giant kings. So yes, we had a bread failure.
Rise of the Mega Kings.
It did not go well. That's what happened this week. So yes, Chungus is fine.
How do you feed a Chungus?
How do you feed a Chungus? So, Chungus gets fed twice a week, sometimes once a week, depending on how slow he is. He lives in the fridge now, that he's a mature starter.
Nearly one.
What you do is you take himself and you give him a good whisk, and you pour out 30 to 40 grams of it, and then you feed that with 120 grams of water and 120 grams of flour, and you put it back in the jar after you wash it, and you put it back in the fridge. So he just eats bread and he just eats flour and water. He's not like Bob. Bob will eat
Anything.
anything.
Anyone.
Chungus is a pickier eater, I'm afraid. I would not try to feed Chungus anything else. It would probably not go well. Chungus gets artisanal organic flour. I mean, Chungus is a special.
He's a growing boy.
She's a special.
Only
child.
the best.
On the end of a long pole with fish and hot pickled peppers. Yes, exactly. Right. And you got anything else you want to talk about? I don't think there is.
Don't think so.
No?
We saw Mortal Kombat.
Yeah.
Mortal Kombat. It was quite good.
It was a movie.
It was a movie that happened.
Mortal Kombat was indeed a movie that happened at our faces. How did you describe him? Tomato can?
The tomato can with the dragon tattoo.
Yes.
Which is the best line I'll write this week.
Quite probably.
It is really, it's very good fun. If you like Mortal Kombat to any degree, you'll have a ton of fun with this.
And like us, you were probably just waiting throughout the entire movie for it to go, Mortal Kombat! And it never did.
Unfortunately, it did also lead me to discover that Mortal Kombat 11 has the movie characters as downloadable skins with the original voice cast.
You mean the game?
Yes.
They're still making them?
Yes.
Everything old is new again.
Christophe Lambert
Really?
came back to do Raiden.
Well, by come back, you mean got in a room with a microphone.
May or may not have left the studio in the intervening time. I miss him. I'm just seeing on the feed a couple of folks talking about Enola Holmes. I'm so happy you found it. It's
so
isn't
good.
it fun?
Swollock. Oh, Henry Cavill is sewn into that waistcoat, and I appreciate it so much.
My favourite piece of Holmesian emoting is in that movie.
I think you talked about this last week, didn't you?
I think so. When he realises his little sister's outsmarted him, and you get the split second of total fury followed by, oh.
The little ha! Yes, exactly. Exactly. Shall we move on?
Let's do the thing.
Is it story time? Am I going to
story time.
remember to change the screen this time? Watch.
Are you going to remember to change the screen, and am I going to remember the content warnings? Yes.
Hang on a second. Let's do the content warnings first.
Content warnings, horror themes, mental health and trauma, socio-political themes, violence, really gross food.
Now repeat all of those.
Horror themes, mental health and trauma, socio-political themes, violence and gross food.
Yep, those are the content warnings as we get ready for chapters 4 through 6 of 9 Goblins by T. Kingfisher.
Gang.
But quick, he's going to be all dramatic and have a drink of water first. Thank you, 4 Rats. You should have told me you were going to take a very long drink of water. I would
I
have
was
vamped
accidentally
for
pressing
you.
the space bar a lot as well, and I thought I could say that out loud and panic, or I could just cover it up by taking another drink of water and quietly moving on my iPad. It's okay, no one noticed.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Style it out.
Chapter 4. 9 Goblins. Chapter 4. The 19th Infantry were marching, if you could call it that. Goblins, well, they march badly. They have enormous thick feet like elephants, so they're pretty good at walking, but they have no rhythm, and very few goblins have ever mastered the ability to tell left from right without stopping to think about it. So when somebody yells, left foot, right foot, there is generally a long silence, while the goblins all try to remember which is which. At some point, one bold goblin will step out, and all the others follow immediately in the hope that he knows what he's doing. It's about a 50-50 shot if he's leading with the correct foot or not, but at least they're all wrong together. On a good day, they will stay in step for nearly a minute before somebody gets bored or trips or stumbles or forgets what he's doing and begins skipping. Small knots break off, officers ride around on their pigs, shouting orders and leaving havoc in their wake, and eventually the better sergeants round up their units and head them more or less in the direction that everybody seems to be going, and in fits and starts, the goblin army lurches ever onwards. Now, Nasilka was a fairly good sergeant, and had most of the wine and niners aimed in the correct direction. Algol and the pack mule formed the nucleus of the group, and since he was taller than most of the other goblins, everyone was able to keep him in sight. At the moment, Nasilka's greatest concern was the 2 new recruits. They were identical twins, and, well, that gave her a headache for a start. They were young and bright-eyed and enthusiastic, and finished each other's sentences, which took the headache to a whole new level. Where are we going, Sarge? We don't know. We just follow orders and go. They gave her identical nods. Will we be fighting, Sarge? Sooner or later, yeah. Everyone stumped alone in silence for a while. The flat, stony badlands were giving way to little lumpy hills and the occasional scrubby tree, with more trees on the horizon. The wind that came to them smelled like pine, which was a pretty big improvement over goblin. The new recruits had the standard loincloth from home, made out of the standard rancid goat hide, and they both had what passed for weaponry in the goblin army, a board with a nail in it. Unless you managed to beat some kind of sense into them, Nasilka gave them maybe a week. So you're twins, she said, by way of an opening gambit. Yes, Sarge, they said in unison. How should I tell you apart? You don't. Not even our mum can tell us apart. We'll fix that, she said grimly and beckoned to Thumper. Thumper would need thick-soled boots to stand 4 feet tall, but he was at least 4 feet wide. His biceps were the size of badgers, and he had no neck. He did not use a shield, preferring to carry 2 large spiked maces, both taken from the fallen foe. When he was hitting things, there was a joyful gleam in his eye, and when he wasn't, there was a glitter that indicated he was, chances are, thinking about hitting things. Thumper had absolutely no personality that Nasilka had ever been able to uncover. Possibly it had gone off with his neck somewhere. But he was an excellent goblin to have at your side in a fight. Recruits, this is Thumper. Hi, Thumper, chorused the twins. Thumper treated this the way he treated everything that did not involve hitting things. He eyed it warily to see if there was any potential hitting to be had, and then ignored it. Thumper, she said, I can't tell these two apart. Thumper nodded. Fix that, she said. He nodded, again, turned around, and punched the one on the left in the face. The recruit fell over. The other recruit gaped at him. Thumper picked the damaged recruit up, nodded to the sergeant, and wandered off. The unfortunate goblin swayed on his feet. His left eye was already swelling, and would shortly be turning a really striking shade of purple. That's better, said Nasilka. Now then, the first thing you should learn is to never, never tell a superior officer what they can't do. They looked at her with identical, miserable expressions. Well, except for the eye. We're really sorry, Sarge. Yeah, well, Nasilka squelched a nagging feeling of guilt. It was a hard world, and it was a hard war, and the sooner they learned it, the better. What are your names? Mishkin, said the one on the right. Mushkin, said the one with the swollen eye. Right. The next thing you should learn is how to take a punch a little better than that, but we'll have to wait until we stop for the night. Have you had any training? At all? We had 2 weeks of boot camp, Sarge. The sergeant grunted. Whacked a lot of straw men with your board, did you? Mishkin nodded vigorously. Mushkin nodded rather more gingerly, holding his face. Up ahead, Weatherby was drifting off to the side. Nasilka could tell he was planning to make a break for it, because he was starting to mutter to himself and tug at his clothes. She sighed and did what sergeants have done since time immemorial. She delegated. Go see Corporal Algol and tell him you've had the basic boot camp and nothing else, and I said to put something on that eye. Yes, Sarge. The twins went to find Algol, and Nasilka went to collar Weatherby. Sings to Trees morning began slightly after dawn when the hen crowed. She was a black hen with a fine gold eye and a blue sheen to her feathers. She laid quite large brown eggs. She also mounted the other hens occasionally, an exercise in bafflement for everyone involved. And every morning she crowed. As far as he could tell, she seemed happy. So he'd resigned himself to getting up at hen's crow most mornings. He hadn't wanted a rooster anyway. His farm was located on the edge of what were nominally the Elven lands. A small human settlement lay less than an hour's walk away, where woods gave way to farmland, and the humans viewed him as falling somewhere between, well, the priest and the village idiot, and thus required feeding either way. Depending on the time of year, gifts of flour or cheese or bacon were always turning up, and they dumped excess chicks on him year-round. He had a hard enough time keeping up with donated chickens. Had his small flock been producing more on their own, he'd have been hip-deep in fowl, so he was somewhat grateful for the confused hen after all. This morning there was a small, fresh cheese on the doorstep, accompanied by a small jug of buttermilk. He took both inside. Fleabane was gone, off on some coyote-ish errand of his own, or there would have been tooth marks in the cheese. Elf and Raccoon shared a pleasant breakfast. It was a little over a month old, the raccoon. not the breakfast, with big wide eyes and delicate dexterous black fingers, and it was surely going to be tearing his house apart. The destructive capacity of small cute animals was really quite astounding. Fortunately, after years of this sort of thing, Singh no longer had that much that could be torn apart. His furniture was heavy wood, scarred by claws, chewed by tiny, and often not so tiny teeth. The cushions faded by hundreds of washings, the rugs ragged and warm and mostly colourless. He owned quite a few rugs. He had to wash them so often that it made sense to keep extras. An elven visitor had commented once, with the air of one desperately trying to find something complimentary to say, about the unusual patterns dyed into the rug. Singh's trees had to explain that it wasn't precisely dyed, but rather marked by numerous mystery stains from patients who had not been entirely in control of their bladders. The silence had been awkward.
Chat is describing this as feral cottagecore.
Feral cottagecore.
And I'm here for it. Somebody get the calligrapher.
He suspected the other elf had been expecting something on the order of a hermit monk, communing with nature and binding up the wings of snow-white doves with snow-white bandages, not a bedraggled lunatic daubed with unspeakable substances, surrounded by shrieking birds, and massaging the belly of a tiny lynx kitten to make it defecate. In Singh's Tree's defence, it had been a particularly insane week, with 2 lynx kittens, a nest full of orphan grey jays, an infant false phoenix that kept exploding into flames when startled, and a pine marten with a broken foot, who would have happily eaten any of the other patients if he could only bloody catch them. The other elf hadn't come back. The raccoon trundled away from its food, stood up briefly on its hind legs, wobbled, tried to steady itself against his mug. The mug went over. Also, the raccoon went over. He could only catch one. And, of course, there was no question. The raccoon snuggled against his chest and went chirp. The mug went plunk. The buttermilk went into his lap. Bad raccoon. Chirp. Well, it was his own fault for trying to feed himself and the creatures at the same time. The raccoon cub went back into its hutch by the hearth. He tailed off the worst of the buttermilk, and then the remains of the raccoon's breakfast. The mug had survived intact. Had he been inclined to collect blown glass sculptures, he would have lived a life of great frustration, but his tastes had been limited by necessity to things that could take, well, a pounding. The mug, for example, was attractively glazed earthenware, pretty enough, but durable, and easily replaced if, say, a raccoon got into a cupboard, had the door swing shut behind it, and tried to smash his way out. Unfortunately, this meant that there was very little elven about his home, as durability went somewhat against the prevailing elven aesthetic of things brought briefly from the earth and then given back. A litter of fox cubs could give things back to the earth at an extraordinary rate, generally before the owner was quite done with them. Singh's resigned himself to art made by humans and occasionally dwarfs. As sacrifices went, he'd made worse. Speaking of sacrifices, he dumped the mug in the wash basin, shoved his feet into boots, squared his shoulders, and went to see if the unicorn was still there. Tiny little asshole trash panda. 2 weeks of... 5. Chapter 5. 2 weeks of boot camp, eh? Said Algol. He was digging in the pack goat's packs until he came up with a dubious bit of steak left over from the elephant. Or possibly Blockhammer. Here, put this on your eye. The steak was cold, thanks to Murray. He'd invented a device that kept meat cold, a small box with a fan and little metal wings. He claimed the wings dispersed heat. Most of the other goblins thought he was loony, but Algol had made an effort to understand. Like birds, he said. Murray had stared at him, wiping sweat from his goggles. Hot air rises, Algol tried to explain, so birds must be hot because they fly. The wings cool them down so they can land without floating away. Right. Murray had said. Yeah, just like that. How novel of you to figure that out. Algol was very proud. Mushkin put the stake on his eye. Mishkin hovered nervously. Will he be okay? Should he go with the medics? Are you in a big hurry to lose the eye? Asked Algol mildly. Keep the stake on it, you'll be fine. He had figured out that the best way to deal with the twins was to address them as one goblin with 4 arms and 2 heads. This is Buttercup, Algol said, nodding to the supply code. Hi, Buttercup, the twins chorused. Up ahead, Sergeant Nasilka cringed. Why had she let him name the goat? You shouldn't name the goat, it was just the goat. If food got scarce enough, you ate the goat, and that was much harder when it had a bloody name. Algol was a good goblin. He was a fairly reliable corporal, but he had some odd blind spots, often where animals were involved. Now then, boot camp. Kill a lot of straw men. Yes, Algol. It's fine. We're fighting scarecrows, I suppose. Unfortunately, we're fighting elves. Have you ever seen an elf? No. We heard they were 8 feet tall and breathed fire from their nostrils, said Mushkin from under his stake. Generally not. No. The average elf, the corporal explained, was a little under 6 feet tall, with pasty skin like a mushroom and long pointy ears, like a mule. They're fast, you see, not goblin fast, but quick, like weasels, and they have really good weapons. Loot their weapons if you get a chance. He patted the sword at his side. It had runes like wriggling worms all down the length, which Murray said meant blade that dances in the houses of the moon in Elven. Algol called it Bob, after his goldfish back home. If you loot their packs, they've usually got pretty good victuals too. Vegetarian, but it's good in stew. Their armour doesn't fit us for beans, so don't bother. Mishkin and Mushkin listened with round eyes, absorbing it all. Now, if we get in a fight, he looked at the twins. They looked back guilelessly. Algol sighed. If we get in a fight, try to stay close to me. He racked his brain. They're all a lot taller than we are, so go for the legs. Hardly anybody has any armour on the back of their knees. We'll try to find you a shield, hold the shield over your head, and go for the knees. Always go for the knees.
Oh, I just realized the chat's right. Another Bob.
Another Bob.
Yay, Bob!
Always go for the knees was, in fact, the family motto of Clan Uggusblot, to which Algol belonged in a roundabout fashion, involving several second cousins and a yak. Uggusblot, as it happened, was also the clan to which the most competent of the ranking generals of the Goblin army also belonged. It had been the scions of Uggusblot who carried the demands of the goblins to the humans, long ago, at the start of the war. Now goblins, much like rats, preferred to flee, but when they're cornered, well, when the goblin scout had arrived on the shore of the Western Sea, the goblin tribes had turned all together like an enormous green rat at bay and bared their collective teeth. So the goblin leaders sat down in the mountain called Goblin Home, half city, half refugee camp, and talked for 3 days and 2 nights. As the sun set on the 3rd day, they signed a large warthog hide on which their demands were written. Then they drew straws for who would carry it to the humans. Clan Uggusblot had drawn the short straw. Mounted on their best... Kate's in the chat.
Kate,
hey,
hello!
How you doing, buddy?
Folks, Cater Takes... Oh gosh, I'm going to say her name wrong. Cater Takes is one of our good friends from genre fiction, and we are so happy that she's popped along to say hello.
And a magnificent streamer as well. Mounted on their best steeds, their faces marked with elaborate tribal patterns in black earth, coup markers braided into their hair, Uggusblot rode down from the mountains to the largest of the nearby human settlements. Single file, heads held high, they rode through the centre of the town and stopped in the central square, and demanded to see the leader of the town. Many of the subtleties were lost on the humans. The lean bodies of war pigs in fighting trim looked feral and half-starved to human eyes. The patterns of black earth, in which a goblin could have read whole volumes about tribal affiliations and clan standing, looked like streaky dirt and caked dust. Coup markers of bone and stone, denoting enemies slain and great deeds done, were seen as garbage trapped in unwashed hair. Where goblins would see high-ranked emissaries in full regalia, the humans saw a raggle-taggle band, ill-kempt and filthy, to be held in pity and contempt. The mayor came out to meet them. To give what little credit he was due, he probably thought he was trying to be kind. "Goblins, huh? You want beer?" he asked, hunkering down in front of Severspine, the heir to Clan Uggersplot. "We, give you beer? You go away?" "We have come to discuss the ongoing human expansion," said Severspine coldly. "We want our lands back." "It's good beer," said the mayor, winking at the townspeople over Severspine's head. Negotiations did not proceed well after that. 3 days later, the war had started. Nothing much would ever be the same again. They'd been marching half the night. A halt had been called for 15 minutes, which was time enough for Murray to whip out his small travel stove and make tea. The 19th crowded round, brandishing their tin mugs and watching with owlish intensity. Goblin tea resembles a nice cup of Earl Grey, in much the same way that a catfish resembles the common tabby. They share a name, but one is a nice thing to curl up with on a rainy afternoon, and the other is found in the muck at the bottom of polluted rivers, and often has pieces of debris sticking to it. Murray poured the tea. Hands went into packs, came out with fistfuls of crude rock sugar. The resulting brew resembled a kind of sweet, gritty mud. Sounds of slurping were followed immediately by cheerful complaints. "Tastes like rat squeezings!" "We don't had anything as good as rat squeezings for 6 months. Tastes like a water buffalo got sick." "I'd kill for some good rat squeezings." Thus complimented, Murray beamed. A pig rider cantered down the road and pulled up in a squealing cloud of dust in the centre of the Wine-in-Niners. Nasilka saluted in a desultory fashion. Pig riders were generally a higher class of messenger idiot than runners, but still nothing to get excited about. "What's the word, then?" she asked. "Another hour, then we're in position and make camp. Dawn attack, so sleep fast." "Dawn will get, she did a little mental maths, 4 hours of sleep? After a day's march?" The messenger grimaced. His pig danced under him. "General's orders." "Yeah, not your fault." Nasilka waved him on. "Thanks." It always takes longer to get somewhere than you think it will, and this is twice as true in the military, so the goblins marched into camp a mere 3 hours before dawn. "All right, troops, equipment check and then get some sleep. We're getting up too damn early, so catch what you can." The tents went up quickly. When your tent is 3 sticks and a whole cowhide, there's not a lot of time spent dithering. At the beginning of the campaign, the cowhide had been uncured, with the resulting smell of rotting leather and ripe goblin, but Murray had gotten the bright idea to salt the things. The end result was a kind of tent jerky. It still didn't smell great, but it kept the rain off, even if folding the hides was becoming increasingly problematic. Nasilka figured if worse came to worse, they could always just eat the tents. "Is it even worth going to sleep?" asked the twins. "Boys, it's always worth going to sleep. Sleep whenever you get the chance. You don't know how long it's going to be until the next time. And eat," Algold said from behind her. "Thank you, yes, Corporal. If there is food available, eat it. Meals can get awfully thin on the ground sometimes." She glanced around the group to see who looked the least tired. "Glad Black, you're on second watch. I'll take first." Since there were plenty of sentries around the edge of the army, there wasn't much point in watching for the enemy, but you never knew when one of the other units was going to try and sneak over and nick your goat. A teddy bear popped into her field of view. Nasilka winced, but it was only Blanchett. "He wants to know when we're attacking," said the owner of the teddy bear. "Tell him Dawn," said the sergeant. Blanchett, unlike much of the 19th, wore a helmet. It was a complicated mass of fangy bone and spiky metal he had taken from a dead orc, and it really didn't fit well, but Blanchett almost never took it off, even when sleeping. You couldn't blame him. A few months back, the Mechanics Corps had been working on a design for a new showerhead. The resulting explosions had inflicted tremendous loss of life on both sides, and Blanchett had taken a flying log to the face. A battle had been raging at the time, so nobody really noticed this, and had chalked him up as missing, presumed dead. I'm seeing reports of buffering, and we're in the red, so I'm going to pause for a minute.
Yeah, let's pause for a moment. I'm seeing that as well. Sorry, everybody. It looks like we're having some buffering issues on Twitch here tonight, so we're going to give it a moment to see if everything gets a little better. Just to respond to a comment I saw in the chat, Eldritch, the book is available for sale, and the link will be in the show notes, and I'll put it in the chat a little bit later on as well.
We're still pretty much parked in red, so...
I think we should just keep going.
Yeah. 2 days later, covered in soot with a knot on his head the size of an eagle's egg, Blanchett had staggered into camp, clutching the teddy bear. It was ragged and moth-eaten, and it was missing an eye, which gave it a permanent squint. As teddy bears go, it would be difficult to find a more disreputable specimen. Nobody knew where he'd gotten it, and honestly, nobody wanted to ask. The teddy bear, as far as Nasilka could tell, was now the brains of the pair. Blanchett refused to answer any query that was not directed to his bear, and only spoke when translating for the bear. In battle, the bear rode on top of the helmet. It had been a long war. By that point, everybody had just figured it was easier to go along, particularly since Blanchett seemed rather more intelligent and helpful these days under the bear's direction. He says, okay, said Blanchett. Nasilka nodded. Blanchett made the teddy bear salute and went off to get some sleep. Weatherby stood up, tugging at his clothes. Right then, I'm not tonight, Weatherby. There's a battle tomorrow. Weatherby heaved a sigh. Fine. You can desert next week. That'll be fun, won't it? Gods, thought Nasilka, listening to her own wheedling voice. These troops don't need a sergeant, they need a babysitter. I want dessert now, Weatherby muttered, slouching off to his tent. He kicked sullenly at a rock. Nasilka stared up at the sky and counted to 10. She finally looked down and then around to the 19th. Algol and Murray, her corporals, Thumper and Weatherby and the twins, Blanchett and his teddy bear, the half-dozen others who didn't make trouble and just kept their heads down and tried to get through. The great grim goblin gods only know who'd be alive after the battle tomorrow. All you could do was pray. And the thing is, she wasn't very good at it. Her prayers tended to sound like, "You, up there, pay attention, and heaven help you if you don't keep an eye on my boys." But as she had every night since becoming sergeant, Nasilka prayed. And now a short chapter break.
It's probably a good point to say we've been streaming almost an hour, folks. So if you have not stretched your legs or had a sip of water or thought about if there's anything else you need to do this evening, like take care of a pet or attend to a medication, this might be a good reminder to do that. And we're on chapter 6.
We are.
Chapter 6.
Chapter 6. The unicorn was gone, and the foal with her. Sinister Trees felt a moment of pure relief. The stall needed mucking out, but that was fine. He'd rather have mucked a dozen stalls than deal with a grumpy postpartum unicorn. It was, all things considered, a glorious late spring morning. Birds sang in the trees, and the air was that tantalizing temperature which was just warm enough so that it didn't feel like anything, until a delicious cool breeze would flicker across your skin. The leaves had come in brilliant, blinding green and glittering like hot stained glass when the sun lanced through them. Sinister Trees went round the side of the ramshackle barn, found his shovel, and went to work on the stall. It was hot work, lifting each shovelful into the wooden wheelbarrow, and he was sweating by the time he wheeled the first load up the garden. Unicorn dung was pretty safe fertilizer. Sometimes the magical creatures had unusual things in their waste. He'd once nursed an injured peryton, a great grey stag, with the wings of a heaven, wings of a heron, and the carnivorous diet of a lion for 2 weeks. He'd gone through a lot of chickens. Afterwards, he put his dung on the tomato plants, and they'd grown 6 feet practically overnight. He could have handled that, but the fruit grew tiny green antlers. He could have handled that too, even after they shed their velvet and got unsettlingly sharp, but he started finding the tomatoes gored and dripping seeds in the morning. Then the nearby zucchini began showing up with scarred rinds and suspicious gouges. Eventually, he was down to one big 8-point tomato buck, a vicious vegetable he suspected was plotting to kill him. He put on his cockatrice handling gloves and torn the whole batch out before things had got out of hand.
Ursula obviously read Bunnicula as a child.
He left that corner empty for a year and then put in chard. Chard seemed pretty innocuous. Not a lot of mayhem available to chard. He didn't actually like chard, but there were plenty of animals that came through that would. So far I hadn't done anything suspicious. He shuddered to think what would have happened with the potatoes. The second wheelbarrow load came and went, and that was it. He sluiced the stones down with water and listened to it gurgle away, feeling the satisfaction of a dirty job done well. A hoof stamped on the stones. He turned. There was a dead deer looking at him. He didn't yelp. On the scale of weird things that had come to him for help, this didn't even make the top 10. Still, he did inhale sharply, and he was glad the shovel was within easy reach. It was a complete skeleton, fully articulated, standing framed in the square of light of the open barn door. Its filigreed shadow streamed away into the darkness of the barn and was lost. He knew it was a deer because of the hooves and the skull and the build, but the delicacy of the thin bone legs was belied by the great rack of antlers on its head. Just a massive, labyrinthine rack, more than he'd known a deer could possibly fit onto its skull. For one horrible moment, he wondered if thinking about the Periton had summoned its ghost, but no. There were no wings, and so far as he knew, the beast was still alive. This creature was probably not alive. At least not in the conventional sense. It looked at him. It didn't have eyes, and its empty eye sockets weren't full of eldritch fire or even darkness. They were just eye sockets, full of ivory shadows and little more. And still, it looked at him. "Can I help you?" he said. It kept looking at him. He spread his hands and took a cautious step forwards, then another. It tilted its head very slowly, and one hind hoof lifted a little and scraped at the cobbles, the faintest sound like a tree branch creaking in a soft breeze. "Do you need help?" He tried again, and took another step. It rattled at him. He froze. The skeleton was articulated, so far as he could tell, by a kind of fine dark webbing at the joints. It looked almost like dried algae, brownish black and forming organic hoops and swirls over the balls of the joints. The deer had given a kind of rolling full-body shrug down through the length of its spine, and the clatter of vertebrae together had made that rattling noise. Sings lifted his palms, hands out. He didn't know what that was supposed to prove, if anything. No reason to think it would recognize any humanoid body language at all. It might understand him, but it might not. Some of the odder creatures were able to understand human speech, and some were no different from just regular beasts. So they stood there for a few minutes. The man and the dead deer, and then it swung its head away, the long, smooth nasal bones pointing into the trees nearest the barn, and stamped its hoof again. A skeletal doe melted out of the trees. She had an awkward, hopping gait, completely at odds with the ossuary grace of the buck. Sings could see immediately that her right front leg was broken. She held it hitched up in front of her, the naked hoof dangling awkwardly. "Oh, you poor thing," he said, and quite forgetting the enormous buck standing there, started towards her. A warning rattle stopped him dead in his tracks. He turned and saw the buck eyeing him eyelessly, the head lowered just a little. He lifted his hands again. "I'll do what I can," he told the bone stag, and then, hoping he wasn't about to be spread-eagled on that gigantic antlered mass, he bowed deeply to the stag, and waited, and straightened, and waited. They stood there for a long, long moment. The leaves whispered in the trees, in a brief cool breeze that chilled the sweat on Sings to Tree's body. The stag lifted his head. Sings turned away. The skin between his shoulder blades crawled. He bowed to the doe for good measure, and she too gazed at him with empty eye sockets. There was no flesh on her. There was nothing that could pull the face into any shape beyond the mute grin of a skull, but still he was sure he could see pain. He knelt in front of her and, very carefully, took the injured leg in his hands. He was shocked immediately by the warmth. This was no dead thing. This was living bone. The break was reasonably clean. He wondered why, lacking muscle and skin to hold it in place, it hadn't just fallen off. Now he saw that the bones were threaded through and around with the black webbing, and a thin skein of it through the hollow centre was still attached. Had this been a real deer, he wouldn't have tried it. Such breaks were extremely difficult to fix. While setting the bone was straightforward enough, you had to keep them basically immobilized for weeks to keep them from breaking it again, and the captivity and stress killed them more surely than the break would. A wild deer could get by on 3 legs, and other than putting out food, there wasn't much you could do that wasn't worse than the injury. It was different with fawns. You could manage fawns, and although he couldn't return them to the wild, more than a few half-tamed deer in parks in the Elven City had started life on this farm. This one, though. Gods. "I can splint it," he said, fairly sure she couldn't understand. "Splint it and wrap it and put some plaster on it. You'll have to stay off it if you can. You probably can't." He was very aware of the stag's knot eyes boring into the back of his head. "Let's start with that," he said, and got up. The stag rattled a little, then stopped as if embarrassed. Walking backwards, making weight gestures with both hands, he got inside the barn and began rummaging around for supplies with which to, once again, do the impossible. Sings is such a badass. "War is just not efficient," said Murray. This was such a typically Murray comment that Nasilka snorted with laughter, even under the circumstances. They were standing in ranks on the top of the hill. Elves and humans stood in ranks at the bottom of the hill. In a few minutes, somebody was going to break and yell, "Attack!" And the humans and elves would come up and the goblins would go down. And then it'd be just shouting and hitting and pointy things. "Look at this," he continued. "They're going to charge up here and we're going to beat them back. And at the end of the day, we'll probably still be up here, and they'll probably still be down there. We both know it. The battle ain't going to change anything, and it's all for control of this stupid hill, which neither of us would give a rat's arse for if there wasn't a war." "It's quite a nice hill," muttered Algol. "Pretty, anyway." He had a wildflower tucked behind one ear. "It's a troll slip," he said helpfully when they all looked at him and his flower. "They grow on hillsides like this." "Very pink," said Murray. "My mum used to grow them back home." There didn't seem to be anything more to say on that front, so they all looked forward again. He was right, so far as it went, but so was Murray. It was a hill, with big grey rocks scattered around the top and little pink troll slips tumbling over them. Here and there an oxeye daisy nodded in the sun. The hill had risen gently out of the woods behind them, leaving the trees behind in favour of a band of heather and the wildflowers. The other sides ranged between steepish, in front, and suicidal, to the sides. It had a pleasant but not particularly dramatic view of the fields below. It was a nice place for a picnic. Probably not a place you'd build a house. But being the highest point for some miles, it was the perfect place for a battle. Everybody wants the high ground, particularly if you're only 4 feet tall and need all the help you can get. The elves down below look like tall white foxes, all narrow pointy faces and broad pointy ears. Their pale silver hair floated around their head like halos. They stood in grim, silent ranks and watched the goblins through narrowed, almond eyes. The humans below were a more varied lot, came in almost as many colours as goblins, from dark brown to pasty pink. No green, though. Couldn't trust a species that didn't come in pink. Couldn't trust a species that didn't come in green. At least they fidgeted before the battle. The Silker appreciated that. The elves, they stood like carved marble. The humans sweated and twitched and snickered and poked each other, very much like goblins. They say the waiting is the worst part. Mishkin and Mushkin had taken Algol's advice literally and were crowded up next to him like two ticks on a tomcat. Algol considered this. Nah, really. Worst part is the part where you hit the other guy and hope he doesn't hit you. Oh. Yeah, and the bit where they hit you, that's the worst as well. Oh. And the bit where they've already hit you and you're not sure if you're alive or not, that's definitely the worst. Corporal! Algol blinked at Sergeant Naselka. Yes, Sarge. It is possible to be too honest. Corporal. Yes, Sarge. They all stood and fidgeted for a while. Do you think we can make tea? Asked Lad Black, who had a purple tint to his skin most of the time, but was now a kind of unhappy grey. No. Weatherby was tugging at his clothes again. Behind the Silker, Thumper was singing something tuneless under his breath. She got something about with a whack whack here and a whack whack there, and tuned him out. Do you think, Murray began, and there was no time for questions because somebody suddenly yelled, Charge! And that is where we will leave it.
Dun dun dun.
I love Murray.
Murray's my favorite. It should surprise absolutely no one in the chat that Murray is my favorite. Hey, how you doing, Shitpost? Thanks for joining us. 12 months, a whole year. Woohoo! Nicely done. Of course it's a cliffhanger. How well do you know us, everyone?
A literal cliffhanger in
Always,
this instance.
in this case, almost literally hanging onto a cliff. Very
I can
much.
also now reveal an incredibly obscure source that I'm blatantly ripping Murray's voice off from. There was a much-loved and very short-run sitcom about people in the Territorial Army, basically our National Guard, many years ago called Life on the Preston Front. And one of the driver from the unit was a big lad called Lloydie. And Lloydie talked like this all the time. And whenever people pointed out that whereas the others all had inventive nicknames like Spock and Brains, and his was just his name with E on the end. He was like, I don't care. I'm cool. Cool as steel. And there was this whole elaborate thing where they did like a community fun day. And one of them was very pleased because he'd buried lots of little packets of sweets for kids to find, but hadn't marked any of them. So Lloydie looks at him for a long time and goes, so what you're telling me is you have invented a boiled sweet plantation.
Oh, good grief.
Not your best day.
Shall we take a little bit of a break and come back for shenanigans?
Let's do that.
All right, everybody. We'll be back in just a couple of minutes. Get yourself a stretch, and remember, there'll be a countdown when we're going to be back. So if you don't see it on the screen, you've got at least 60 seconds. We'll see you in a few.
So, Marguerite made cupcakes. For those of you who have seen us do the Dream Avatar Valentim expansion, you will know the significance of a blue cupcake iced with the word "don't" on it. For those of you that have not, it's very much worth playing, and this is a certain private little in-joke between Peter and Elias, which Peter chooses to ignore.
You're going to have blue frosting all over your face for the rest of the stream, aren't you? And yes, I did save that one cupcake for tonight. Of course. Of course. Quick! Quick, I have to vamp while you've got cupcake in your mouth. Thank you. Yeah, Blue Peter, yes. Very much a joke on so many levels. Exactly. Did you deal with crumbs or are you going to eat the... Of course you're going to eat the rest of it. Leave no cupcake behind. Is it sea salt caramel? Oh, that would have been a great idea, Compost. No, this is my favorite vegan chocolate cake recipe with decidedly not vegan fudge frosting on the top. Except for the blue ones were not fudge. They were just regular frosting because I couldn't dye chocolate blue. That would have taken a lot more work.
Hey, do you remember when Philadelphia tried to sell chocolate cream cheese over here?
That did not go well. It doesn't sound very good at all. And the shirt was perfect for that scene. Yes, very much so. That sounds good. Shall we?
Oh, the shenan we have for you.
We have such shenanigans tonight, everybody. Let me put a link in the chat for you. If you wish to read along.
Like full-on Sam Neill with no eyes going, "We have such shenanigans for you." It's not the line, Sam. Oh, I'm sorry.
Love finds a Suez. There we go. All right. Chug, chug, chug. Good to go?
Stream. Let's do it.
There are content warnings for the shenanigan as well.
There are.
Yes.
Mental health and trauma.
Well, it's Peter and Elias in a relationship. That it deserves a content warning in and of itself. Yes.
Then Herzog shenanigans. That's right, baby.
No, that was last week.
Love Finds a Suez by Chanel Pirate. Notes. And now for something a little bit different. This is my moment. Alternate title. That's the Suez it goes. The MV Tundra had been an unusual acquisition for soulless shipping. The shipbrokers had honestly been baffled. Why would an actively trading shipping company be interested in adding a 179,000 DWT Singapore FOC Sungdong-built 1984 Cape to their fleet on resale, no less? I mean, she stood out. The soulless fleet comprised 23 new Panamaxes, 6 Kamsarmaxes, and an Ultramax. Now, these are good, respectable container vessels that could navigate most maritime water thoroughfares across the globe, but one never asked too many questions when one was on commission, and brokerage was successful.
I love how somebody said, "Isn't Jonah Magnus being a bastard a canonical AO3 tag?"
It had been an interesting visit from Soulless Shipping's Classification Society relationship manager. The ship's age and unusual size for the decade in which she was built meant that in order to fulfill its certification requirements, it had to pass an unprecedented amount of expensive surveys and modifications to fit compliance. The ballast water treatment system had to be completely replaced, all procedures had to be correctly undertaken in due order, and once they were, the MV Tundra was classed seaworthy. The insurers had been the slowest to come around. In the end, they only took her on because they had already counted the rest of the fleet on their list. That and the CEO had gone to Eton with Nathaniel Lucas, and even then only because Lucas had implied that with the renewal date approaching he might decide to split the fleet among 2 additional insurers in the spirit of healthy competition, old chap. Of course, this meant the insurer now had a curio on their list, something to laugh nervously about before changing the subject at Christmas parties. The quarterly premium would have been a deterrent to any commercially minded ship owner, but to the Lucas family, it was no deterrent at all. Solar Shipping had an in-house technical management team based in Mayfair, so no issue was presented on that front. And crew management for the vessel, and this vessel alone, came under the compliance purview. This vessel alone came under the purview of Captain Peter Lucas, the prodigal scion. The captain was in his cabin when it happened, a dull resonance that boomed and vibrated through his body. He paid it no mind and went back to reading Atlas Shrugged. Oh, Peter! Oh, Peter!
Oh, how very no!
The one alone sometimes made strange noises when it sensed a meal was due. Peter looked up again when the radio crackled, interrupting Calt's rousing speech on objectivism. It was the emergency frequency. Tadeus Dahl knew not to attempt any other communication when Peter was not at the bridge. Peter sighed as he picked it up. Go ahead. Captain. Silence fell. Come in, Tadeus, Peter said with creepy irritation. Creepy irritation. Freudian slip. Creeping irritation. Ellipsis was his game. Captain, we're stuck. Over. Peter refrained from looking out of the porthole. Their current route was one of the least lonely they'd had to take in years, but he'd received a tip-off from Salisa, whom he'd agreed to meet at Civitavecchia. There'd been a few dozen nautical miles from the Gulf of Aden when the call had come through. Something about verifying a camera. He didn't really care. He'd promised some fodder in exchange. It meant that they'd have to go through the sewers, and Peter hated the sewers. It was so busy, and the waiting in so much company, just no clear horizon. Radio check? Yeah, I hear you. Repeat. We're stuck. We've run aground. And we need you at the bridge. We're blocking the canal. The Coast Guard are on their way. What in the forsaken... Now, as it turned out, the bow was well and truly wedged into the bank. A freak accident, the traffic piling up behind them, the tundra not moving. He had to speak to the Coast Guard and port authorities, pilot boats. Still, she did not budge. He had to communicate with the tug when it came. The tundra remained resolutely in place. It had been a whole day of talking to people. Things could not possibly get any worse. And then the international press arrived, and Elias's smirk in the Reuters correspondent's long focus lens was as palpable as the latest spousal maintenance payment. Is this something to do with Gertrude Robinson? He hissed into the phone, pacing the deck at starboard aft, far away from the bank. I'm sure I've no idea what you mean, Elias said. He sounded bored. Peter could hear faint clicking coming from his end. Oh, did you know you're the subject of a BuzzFeed article? Your beard seems to have inspired some ardour, and your ship seems to have launched 1,000 memes. What? Peter was overcome by a pall of nausea, the lonely's hunger. He sat on the floor, back to a container. Well, originally coined by Richard Dawkins. I know what a meme is, Elias. I think you'll find it's pronounced... Peter hung up and stared past the phone. In his sight line, nothing but ships and ships and ships. Drones in the air, all watching his every move. A text message appeared. He only read it because it was in his peripheral vision. He really ought to figure out how to disable notifications. They're calling you Sexy Captain Birdseye. What wonderful irony. Followed by a wink.
Winky face!
You are space N-O-T space F-U-N-N-Y space frown send. Peter typed out, despite himself. Elias was glutting himself on this, as I'm sure he... Elias was glutting himself on this as it was. Elias responded with something rather rude in ASCII, somewhat uncalled for. 4 days. Dredges, diggers, teamwork, newspaper reports, industry scrutiny, op-eds. The lonely did not coexist with concepts such as emotion, but if a shade of one could be presumed upon it, translated through the clumsy and mundane lexicon of humanity, it would be this: apocalyptic, and not by way of a successful ritual.
Just the way he says, "Oh, man, it's going to break me."
Peter locked himself in his cabin when he could. What would Ayn Rand do? He found himself thinking hysterical. Blow it all up like those mines. Robinson had her merits after all. For a record, second time in under a week. Peter picked up the phone. Peter? Elias's surprise echoed for both of them. Wasn't there a lightener? I'm not sure what you mean. You're going to have to elaborate. Peter could hear an odd sloshing noise. He made sure there were no eyes in his cabin, but there were enough survey drones about. He was pretty sure Elias would be able to get an angle of him. You know, the lightener, the one that caused the man to kick up. For goodness sake, Elias, you passed him on to me afterwards. Yes. You know, I think I do know.
You evil man, you!
The shit-eating grin was audible. Which one was it? Dig. 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 Yes, quite, Peter snapped, the sloshing again. Are you in the bath? There was a very long pause. Peter was about to hang up when Elias spoke. You left your Fortnum and Mason's bath salts behind? Elias was the only man he knew who could articulate an ampersand. You know, from the Christmas hamper. Peter pinched the bridge of his nose.
Oh, that's going on the Christmas list.
So do you still have it? The hamper? He was going to die here. The lightner. A sigh of mock concern. Peter, why don't you just ask what you want me to ask? Why don't you... Peter, why don't you ask me what you want to ask me, dear? Nothing's working. They might start poking at the containers soon. I'm going to need you to send me the lightener, he said through gritted teeth. That's stuck, is it? Not to worry. If you can arrange the Cessna, I can be there by the morning with the book. That won't be necessary. But Peter... And it was that stupid pout. Peter could see it as though the twat was right in front of him. It's the fastest way. The world's eyes are on you.
Evil.
Peter?
Dirty!
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 Peter sighed. Elias knew that it annoyed him when he used his name. Not that he told him that. Fine. Fine. But you're dropping off the book and then you are leaving right away. Also, the book needs a user. I suppose I have a spare crew member. But you're leaving after. That's the main thing. Of course. That can be arranged. Elias said breathily. Yes. Right. Peter said, I'll call my people. I look forward to seeing you soon, big man, he purred. And Peter knew what was coming then. He's a big boat man. Peter hung up. Putting up with Elias's nonsense was worth it if it meant getting out of here. Almost. Except it meant he would have to put up with Elias's nonsense in person. Always the flaw in the plan when it came to his ex-husband. Day 5. Peter leaned against the taffrail and watched the tiny digger chipping away at the mud. It was dwarfed by the tundra. Fairchild was probably getting a kick out of this too, he thought. He delegated most of the coordination efforts to Dahl. The man was paid too much to ask questions, and took up the task with aplomb. He'd give him a raise, but he didn't want him to feel acknowledged. What were any of them but lone diggers, rolling about in the mud of life, trying to extricate themselves from the indignity of being perceived? Peter was saved from further extended bad metaphor by the beating sound of approaching rotors in the air, adding to the cacophony of motion he had already been trying to block out. That would be the helicopter carrying Elias from Port Said. He squared his jaw, crossed the deck to the helipad, watched with apprehension as the helicopter landed, watched as the rotor slowed, watched as the noise level fell. And behold, from the belly of the airborne beast did dynamically emerge the bastard himself. And of course he was wearing a linen suit that he who wore it had paired with the limited edition Louis Vuitton carrier bag within his grasp, and lo, a pair of obnoxiously oversized sunglasses folded onto his breast pocket, and that stupid grin bedecked his handsome face. He looked incredible. Of course, the effect was ruined the moment he opened his big stupid mouth. Oh dear, the state of this. I haven't really looked at the canal properly since the 50s. It really has gone downhill since we owned it, hasn't it? This couldn't have happened in the old days. Elias! Peter realized he was grinding his teeth and stopped. Elias wasn't worth another trip to the dentist. The book. My, what a warm welcome. And after such a long journey, too. He swiveled on his brown leather brogues to look about at the drones, the cameras, the live feeds, the phones, the reporters, the mariners, the guards, the seagulls, an irritating, superfluous gesture, as if he couldn't let out of each of the 1,000 eyes that surrounded them. Well, I suppose it's the reason I'm here. I'll just give it to you and get back in that helicopter, shall I? Please do, murmured Peter. Elias nodded, setting the carrier bag on the floor. In that nod, their eyes met, and in that moment, Peter knew without a doubt that he was in trouble. The eyes pressed in. Elias was loving this. Beholding was feasting to Peter's famine. Elias knelt, unzipped the bag. He pulled out a metal strongbox and handed it to Peter. Their fingers grazed as he passed it over. Mind that you don't handle it yourself, Elias said, just a little earnest for once. Quite. Dread settled in Peter's stomach. You can get up now. The bag lay open between them, Elias kneeling on one knee behind it. There was just one more thing, Peter. Magnus, I swear by the Forsaken, I swear. Did you know that over the past few days you have become something of a, what is it that the kids are calling it? LGBT icon. Oh, you wouldn't. The shipping world is in dire need of a refresh, Peter, don't you think? And that only comes from visible representation. Elias grinned, rummaging in his bag. At least that's how I've experienced change in my time. Oh, you bastard! Oh, you total prick! Peter squeezed his eyes shut, which he realized was a mistake as soon as he realized what he could see once he opened them, which unfortunately was not optional. Peter, said Elias, and to anybody who didn't know him as well as Peter did, his tone would have sounded soft. He opened his eyes, and of course, the grand exhibitionist voyeur himself was kneeling there with his stupid arm raised, holding a stupid box, and there with the entire world and their gods and everyone watching, there laid a stupid diamond ring glinting in the stupid Egyptian sun. Peter, will you give yourself the honor of being beheld? That was a nice one. What? No, what? He could tell Elias was doing his utmost not to roll his eyes. Fine, marry me. Will it make you go away? Peter, my darling, Elias said, you would have to empty the Lucas coffers to convince me to stay in this heat for any length of time. Okay, fine, yes, go ahead. And excellent. Elias put the ring on Peter's finger. There was no tenderness in it. I think we should kiss. For the cameras. Twitter will love it. Peter sighed. The attention burned.
Evil
The thought of the publicity, the... Mimi's burned. Par for the course with this man. He would repay Elias more than his fair share of loneliness. Yet somehow, in his discontent and misery, Peter had not felt this isolated since this entire situation had begun. He pulled Elias to his feet and into his arms. He tried to ignore the sound of clapping. And on the 6th day, a disposable man read the word dig. And so he dug, and so the vessel known as the Tundra was freed from its ensnarement, and Elias, comfortable in the bracing London drizzle, looked at what he had done. And it was good. Notes, they're awful. They're awful as individuals. They're awful together. It's great. This fic was dredged up from my very soul, much like a certain container ship was dredged up from the mud. I'd love to know what you think. Feel free to drop in a comment and let me know. This was fantastic.
Evil, evil, evil man. Oh, that's my phone telling me I should go to bed. Too bad.
What impeccable timing.
And good job, Mods. Thank you very much for jumping on this.
Thanks, Mods. That looked like a fairly standard group of no-necks.
Yeah, exactly. Drive-by bots. We've taken care of them. It's all good.
Hey, apparently I look like someone's granddad. Cool. That's pretty much all we have for you this week, which is a little bit like, I know, a little bit like saying, here is a 3-course meal full of many wonderful things. I'm really sorry they're on to 5th, 6th, and 7th course. But...
Oh, Channel Pirate is in. This is theirs.
and
Oh dear, you're right. Take your time.
Pardon me.
Have a sip of water. There we go. Excellent job. I now want Channel Pirate to tell us all about their obvious background in conventional shipping, because wow, that was it's a fanfic about compliance and insurance. I was really happy.
That was so well done. Thank you so much for that. And I don't think Elias has had a better entrance in a piece of fanfic.
The only thing missing from that description was the Panama hat.
Yes.
But the linen suit off the snow.
The linen suit.
Oh, you just. You just want to. Anyway.
Cometh the man, cometh the bastard.
Oh, right. Shipping and shipping.
Nicely
well
done.
Excellent double major. I approve. Why don't, while I push a button, hang on.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't you remind folks what's going on next week?
This coming Sunday, there is nothing.
There is not a stream this Sunday because poor Alistair has to be on like a 6-hour meeting all day Sunday. And I failed to secure a PS5 today. So there will be no Mass Effect Legendary Edition from Mark.
We got to see what it looks like when it's in stock.
Yes, I was actually on the Amazon page while it was in stock, but that's as close as we got, unfortunately. So no stream this Sunday, and we will be back on Wednesday to find out what happens to our poor beloved goblins.
Yes, indeed. And then the Sunday after that, we'll be back for possibly the end game of...
This game is
council.
Really starting to annoy me. We've got to finish the council so I can move on to something nicer. And I have so many candidates, so we'll find something.
Oh, are you thinking of anything fun?
You've come up with a couple of suggestions. There's that amazing new little like power washing game, which just sounds so cathartic.
Yes.
We'll find something, I'm sure.
Also, sooner or later, Shipbreaker will come out for the PS4.
What is Shipbreaker?
Hi, you're a minimum wage employee from a corporation that buys space junk cheap. Break it down and strip it for parts, and don't die.
That very much sounds like our kind of game.
Thank you so much, Chanel. That was an amazing piece.
I know, Betsy. I've never mentioned that I want a
too.
PS5, right? Thank you very much, everybody. I think that's everything. Oh, one more thing we should probably mention. The Ignite Awards are still open for votes through the end of Friday. I think it's Eastern Time. Let me put a link for that in the chat. They are open to the public. Alistair and I have 2 shows that are nominated for the Best Fiction Podcast category, Podcastle and Escape Pod, and you'll probably recognize another one of them. The very excellent Magnus Archives.
Oh, hey, I've heard of them. They're quite good.
I've heard of them too. So if you would please pop along. There's some fantastic finalists in a lot of different great categories. We're huge fans of Fiacon and the Ignite Awards. We are in fact sponsors of them this year. So please do go and check them out and maybe consider coming along to the convention in September. It's online. It has an extensive, well, it used to be called Fringe and now it's called Bonfire, which is their kind of around-the-clock Fringe festival. And it's not that expensive and going to be a great time, and we will be there participating as well.
Some guy named Jimmy Magnet.
Jimmy Magnet.
Now, that's the little-known, seldom reported on 1940s hard-boiled noir. Jimmy Magnet in The Dame Had an Eye. Just one. Nothing else. She was just an eye.
But she was still trouble when she walked into my office.
I could tell she was trouble when she walked into my office because she was just an eye. Oh, God, what have I done?
You've created your own story. Oh, great. Here we go again.
On that bombshell. Oh, yeah. Pardon me. Our Hugo-nominated pop culture newsletter, The Full Lid, goes live Friday at 5 p.m.
British time.
British time. This week, I may or may not be talking at length about Mortal Kombat! And also another movie that's very good, which I'm going to keep you in suspense about. We're on 2 stories at the moment because I have the mysterious book I cannot talk about or acknowledge the existence of, yet it is my day job to write. But the 3-story ones will be popping back up relatively soon. So.
Yep. Thank you very much to all of our mods. Any other final thoughts, Han?
Just go be nice to yourselves. The world is still hard and awful in places. Make sure none of those places are impacting on you.
Exactly.
Go have a good one.
All right. Thanks so much, everybody. Stream show notes will be out on Twitter in a little bit. Thank you for joining us.